Today, we're diving into the bizarre, erratic, and deeply consequential early life of Adolf Hitler. You know, we so often look at historical figures only in their final, most destructive forms. But how exactly does someone go from being just an ordinary kid to history's most notorious dictator? Well, we're going to break down the exact cause and effect of his early years to find out.
I mean, it's just pure dramatic irony, isn't it? Just look at the innocence here. You'd naturally think this child, born back in 1889 in a small town in Austria-Hungary, would grow up to be a completely normal, honest man. But as history violently reminds us, think again.
Section 1, a complicated family tree. Let's start by looking at his father's, incredibly messy love life. Alois Hitler was a mid-level Austrian customs officer who wasn't exactly rolling in cash, but the man was absolutely rolling in women. To put it bluntly, Alois had an absolute train wreck of a love life. He married a rich, older lady, but then immediately started having affairs, including one with a young house servant. And because the Catholic Church didn't allow divorce back then, he literally had to wait for his sick wife to die before he could marry his mistress. Then, wife number 2 got sick, so he brings in his much younger cousin Clara to take care of her. When the second wife passes away, he immediately gets Clara, again his cousin, pregnant and marries her, in that exact order. This whole chaotic sequence is what finally culminated in Clara giving birth to young Adolf. Now, Clara and Alois actually had 3 children prior to this, all of whom tragically died in infancy. So when Adolf finally came along, Clara understandably spoiled him rotten. But here's the catch. The family moved around constantly. Adolf actually had to bounce between 5 different elementary schools. And you can imagine, that level of constant disruption early on sets a really, really unstable foundation for a kid. Moving on to Section 2, the rebellious student. Early on, Adolf was actually a popular kid who did pretty well in class. But as he grew older, that demeanor drastically changed. The kid just started racking up offenses. He got caught smoking, he organized a literal raid on a local orchard, and he even went out of his way to torment his pro-Austria religion teacher. See, the area he lived in was once part of the German Confederation, so he began leaning heavily into German nationalism. But why? Honestly, mostly just to spite his father, who was an Austrian public official. It was classic teenage rebellion, but laced with these deeply political undertones.
Now, the key thing to remember here is that Alois was incredibly strict and had a notoriously short fuse. So Hitler's constant defiance meant he wasn't just getting grounded, he was regularly and severely punished. It sparked this highly volatile, strained relationship between father and son, which in turn pushed Adolf even closer to his overly anxious, doting mother.
This whole dynamic built up to a massive, explosive clash of ideals. One day, his father essentially lays down the law, telling him, "Someday you're going to be a big public official like me." And Adolf dramatically fires back, "No, father, I'm going to become an artist and soar high above the clouds with the eagles." Talk about a flair for the dramatic, right? As you can guess, this absolutely enraged his father. But by this time, Alois was getting really old, so he kind of just let it go, shortly before he unexpectedly died from a lung hemorrhage. Which brings us to Section 3, failure in Vienna, dreams denied. So after his father's death, a 16-year-old Hitler barely passes his final semester, drops out completely, and eventually heads to Vienna to pursue this grand vision of becoming an artist. But man, reality hit him like a freight train. First, he flat out fails the art school entrance exam. Then, he returns home only to find his mother rapidly dying from illness. When she passed, the family doctor actually noted he had never seen a person so overwhelmingly grief-stricken. Finally, he heads back to Vienna, but now, he's got no parental support, no career, and he ends up completely drifting. By his early 20s, he's living in and out of homeless shelters, literally scraping by just selling painted postcards on the street. Now, during this absolute rock-bottom phase of his life, he was soaking in a highly toxic environment. Vienna at the time was just absolutely rife with anti-Semitism.
The mayor was an outspoken anti-Semite, and these radical right-wing newsletters were everywhere. They promoted wild conspiracy theories about racial struggles, championing the German Aryan as pure while vilifying Jews. This widespread cultural prejudice deeply infected the young, aimless drifter. It handed him a very convenient scapegoat for his own personal failures. Over time, Hitler grew to completely despise Austria-Hungary. He looked at it as this multi-ethnic empire full of what he considered lesser races. So at the age of 24, he makes a pivotal move. He flees to Munich, Germany. And ironically enough, a huge motivation for this move was just to dodge military service back home. But once he gets to Munich, nothing really changes. He spends another whole year just drifting on the streets. Section 4, Finding Purpose in War. Because everything was about to change when long-standing European tensions finally boiled over. The year is 1914. World War I erupts. Now, while the rest of us view this as a horrific global tragedy, for Hitler, it was an absolute lifeline. Within days, he eagerly volunteers for the German army. Suddenly, this homeless street drifter finds a sense of purpose, a clear direction, and, in the grim, muddy reality of the trenches, he actually finds friendship and brotherhood. His perspective on the conflict was, well, entirely warped. Despite the unimaginable horrors of the First World War, Hitler actually called it the best time of his life. Wild, right? He absolutely thrived in the strict military structure. He was reportedly a brave soldier, earned the Iron Cross First Class, and somehow managed to survive numerous, incredibly close encounters with death. But luck eventually runs out. In 1916, an artillery shell injures his leg, and he's sent back to Germany to recover. But instead of returning to a unified, deeply patriotic nation, he is absolutely furious to find an exhausted, hungry public with a massive anti-war attitude. To him, these civilians weren't suffering from a brutal war of attrition. He just thought they lacked resolve. Which leads us to our final chapter, Section 5, Defeat and Radicalization. He eventually went back to the front lines, but in 1918, Hitler was temporarily blinded by a British gas attack. And while he's lying there in a hospital bed, slowly getting his vision back, he gets the news that completely shatters his reality. Germany had been defeated. Germany had surrendered. The resulting peace agreement, the infamous Treaty of Versailles, just utterly crushed Germany. The financial hit was staggering, with massive reparations. Militarily, they faced huge restrictions and losses. But the biggest blow by far was to their pride. These incredibly harsh conditions deeply humiliated the German people, and specifically the very nation he felt he had just bled for. On top of that, the entire map of Europe was basically erased and redrawn. New countries popped up out of lost Russian territory. Austria-Hungary, that multi-ethnic empire he hated so much, just completely dissolved. And Germany itself was physically split right in two. This massive geopolitical devastation just compounded the profound psychological devastation he was already dealing with. Seeing the country he loved utterly broken like this, a dark, radical hatred solidified within him. He simply couldn't accept the idea that the powerful German military had actually been bested on the battlefield. His mind demanded an answer. It demanded a scapegoat for this one burning question. Who was to blame for this national humiliation? And right here, this is where the dictator is truly forged. He fully buys into the stabbed-in-the-back theory. This was a massive conspiracy claiming that Germany hadn't actually lost the fight militarily, but was betrayed from the inside by communists and Jews, spreading dissent and anti-war propaganda on the home front. It perfectly, dangerously aligned with that toxic, anti-Semitic worldview he had absorbed all those years ago as a homeless drifter in Vienna. So you really have to ask yourself, how does a rejected artist's personal failure, combined with a catastrophic national humiliation, forge the most destructive dictator in human history? It leaves us with a chilling realization to take away from this explainer today. History's darkest moments are so often born from this exact, terrifying intersection of deep personal failure and massive geopolitical collapse.
It's a stark reminder of what happens when a broken individual finds a broken nation and decides to build his entire purpose on hatred.